Hello everyone, welcome back to Old Charles, the channel where we dive deep into the fascinating world of coins, currency, and history. Today, we're going to talk about a small but very interesting coin, the Canada 1 cent from 1973. Don't let its size fool you, because this little penny has a lot of history, unique features, and even some special varieties that can be worth far more than just 1 cent. So let's jump right in. The Canadian 1 cent coin, also known as the penny, has been an important part of Canada's currency system for more than a century. The 1973 issue is particularly interesting because it was struck during a period of design changes and national celebration. In 1973, Canada was celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP. The Royal Canadian Mint produced special commemorative coins for higher denominations, but the humble penny also saw a fascinating twist. Most Canadian pennies from the 1970s featured the familiar maple leaf twig design created by G.E. Kruger Gray in 1937. On the obverse side, you'll see the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, designed by Arnold Machin. This design shows the Queen wearing a tiara and was used from 1965 until 1989, but here's where things get interesting. In 1973, the Mint was transitioning between two different obverse portrait designs. Because of this, collectors have identified varieties of the 1973 cent, some of which can be much more valuable than the regular strike. Now let's talk about the part many of you are curious about, the value. A typical 1973 Canadian penny found in circulation today is usually worth 1 to 5 cents, mainly as a collectible piece. These are very common, since millions were minted. If you have a 1973 penny in excellent condition, bright red luster, no scratches, no wear, it can be worth between $1 and $5 CAD, depending on the grade. Some coins struck for collector sets in 1973 can carry higher values, often $5 to $20 CAD or more, especially if graded by professional services like ICCS or PCGS. Here's the exciting part. There are rare 1973 Canadian 1 cent coins where the obverse features the large bust design, which was actually intended for the new 1973 RCMP commemorative quarter. This mix-up created a collectible variety that can sell for hundreds of dollars, depending on grade and demand. If you have a 1973 Canadian penny, here's how to evaluate it. If it's heavily circulated, scratched, or dark in color, it's mostly sentimental and worth just a few cents. If it's shiny and shows no wear, it could be worth more. The large bust variety is the one collectors really want. Compare the Queen's portrait with regular 1973 cents. If the portrait looks slightly larger and closer to the rim, you may have a special one. Coins are graded on a scale from poor, P1, to mint state, MS, 70. The higher the grade, the higher the value. If you suspect you have a rare variety, send it to a grading service like ICCS, NGC, or PCGS for authentication and official grading. Most 1973 pennies are common, but collectors always look for high-quality coins. If you have rolls of old Canadian cents lying around, check carefully. You might just find one of the rare large bust obverse coins. So, to sum it up, the 1973 Canadian 1 cent is usually a common coin worth only a few cents, but if you have one in pristine condition or with a rare variety like the large bust, it could be worth a lot more, even hundreds of dollars. To truly understand the 1973 Canadian 1 cent coin, we need to take a step back into the long and rich history of Canadian coinage. The Canadian 1 cent coin, often simply called the penny, has been around since 1858, when the province of Canada, before Confederation, issued its very first bronze cent. Back then, the coin was relatively large, almost the size of a modern Canadian quarter, and it bore the image of Queen Victoria on the obverse and a simple maple wreath on the reverse. That early design set the tone for the penny as a national symbol, linking Canada's money to both its British monarchy and its native maple leaf. After Confederation in 1867, Canada continued producing pennies, but the designs changed over time as new monarchs came to power. By the early 20th century, the cent had already become an everyday part of Canadian commerce, used by farmers, merchants, and families across the country. Fast forward to 1937, when one of the most iconic designs in Canadian numismatic history was introduced, the maple leaf twig reverse, designed by English artist George Edward Kruger Gray. This design, featuring two maple leaves sprouting from a twig, became the standard reverse image for the penny and remained in use for more than 75 years, right up until the coin was retired in 2012. For Canadians, that design became deeply familiar. Almost every child who grew up in Canada had jars or piggy banks filled with maple leaf pennies. The obverse, of course, always reflected the reigning monarch. In 1953, following the death of King George VI, the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II first appeared on Canadian coins. At the time, the portrait was youthful and crowned, designed by Mary Gillick. But in 1965, the Royal Canadian Mint adopted a new effigy created by Arnold Machin, a British sculptor. This portrait, showing a more mature queen wearing a tiara, became the standard on Canadian coins from 1965 until 1989. This is the very portrait you'll see on the 1973 1-cent coin. Now, 1973 was an important year for Canada's coinage system. The country was celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, and the Royal Canadian Mint issued commemorative designs for several coins, including the 25-cent piece featuring a mounted officer. This celebration was a point of pride for Canada, showcasing its history, traditions, and national identity. But what many collectors don't realize is that during this same year, the penny also saw a subtle but important design twist. Because of adjustments at the mint and the transition between master dies, some of the 1973 1-cent coins were struck with an unusual obverse portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, a larger bust variety that was slightly different from the standard Machin portrait. This created an unexpected collectible variety that has fascinated coin collectors for decades. It's also worth noting that during the 1970s, pennies were still struck in bronze, made of 98% copper, 0.5% tin, and 1.5% zinc. This gave the coins their classic reddish-brown look, which over time can change to darker brown or even greenish tones depending on how the coin has aged. The copper composition also makes these coins feel more solid compared to the lighter-plated steel pennies introduced later in Canadian history. So, when you hold a 1973 Canadian 1-cent coin in your hand, you're not just holding a small piece of change. You're holding a symbol of Canada's heritage, art, and the era of Queen Elizabeth II's early reign. It's a coin that connects to the broader history of Canada's economy, its culture, and even its place within the Commonwealth. The penny itself, of course, was eventually discontinued in 2012 after over 150 years of circulation, because inflation had made it too costly to produce and not very useful in commerce. But coins like the 1973 issue remain as collectible reminders of a bygone era when the penny was still an essential part of Canadian daily life. When it comes to coins, especially the 1973 Canadian 1-cent, condition is everything. The difference between a coin worth just a cent and one worth several dollars, or even hundreds in rare varieties, often comes down to how well it has been preserved over the years. Let's take a deep dive into how collectors evaluate the condition of this coin. Coins are graded using an international scale that ranges from poor, P1, all the way up to mint state, MS 70. Each step reflects the amount of detail, sharpness, and preservation of the coin. A 1973 penny in this grade will be heavily worn. The Queen's portrait will be flat, the maple leaves will have lost nearly all detail, and the coin will look dark and damaged. Value, face value or slightly above. The coin will still be quite worn, but you can make out more of the Queen's features and the maple leaves. Collectors don't usually pay a premium for these unless they are rare varieties. Here you start to see more detail. The maple leaves have veins visible, and the Queen's hair design is clearer. Some light wear will still be noticeable. The coin shows only light circulation wear. Much of the design is still sharp, and the luster, that shiny glow from the original strike, may still be partly visible. These coins are just below mint state. They may have slight rub on the highest points, but overall they look sharp and attractive. A 1973 penny in AU condition already carries collector value. This is where serious collectors pay attention. Mint state coins are uncirculated, with no signs of wear. Practically perfect. These are extremely rare for a 1973 penny and usually only found in carefully preserved proof-like sets. Because the 1973 Canadian penny was made of bronze, mostly copper, its color plays a big role in determining condition and value. Collectors grade copper coins by their surface color. Bright, shiny copper red like when it was freshly minted. The most desirable and valuable, a mix of red and brown tones. Still collectible, but less valuable than full red. Completely darkened to chocolate brown or darker. Common and less valuable unless in high grade. 1973 cent in mint state red can be worth many times more than the exact same coin in brown. And one golden rule, never clean your coins. Cleaning leaves scratches and removes the natural surface, reducing the value drastically. Even if a coin looks shiny after cleaning, collectors will consider it damaged. Over time, copper coins develop a natural layer of toning. For the 1973 penny, this can range from golden orange to deep brown. Some coins even develop rainbow-like toning, which can actually increase their value if it looks attractive. Collectors pay attention to eye appeal, how nice the coin looks overall. A coin with great luster, even color, and minimal marks is more desirable than a technically higher-graded coin with ugly spots or scratches. For common 1973 pennies, certification might not be worth the cost. But if you believe you have, then sending your coin to a grading service like ICCS, International Coin Certification Service, PCGS, or NGC is the best way to maximize value. A certified coin comes in a tamper-proof holder with an official grade, making it easier to sell and more trusted by buyers. Can sell for hundreds of dollars at auctions, particularly if certified. So, when you look at your 1973 Canadian 1-cent coin, don't just see a small copper piece. Think about its grade, its color, its luster, and its overall eye appeal. The better the condition, the more history it preserves, and the more collectors will be willing to pay for it.